That was a little more tricky because I couldn't just push him away and I couldn't put too much weight on his chest. That would surely wake him. What are you doing? His husky voice made me freeze in my movements. So much for not waking him up. Blushing crimson, I darted my eyes towards his face. He looked like a god with his hands folded beneath his head, his dark hair all messy from sleeping, his eyes hooded as he smirked at me, revealing a set of straight white teeth. Getting up? I said softly. My voice sounded normal for once. Why? He said, a frown creasing his forehead shortly. He moved his arms again, wrapping them around my waist as if to physically keep me from getting up. I shook my head, trying to break eye contact, but his stormy eyes seemed to draw me in. Up close, I could see the darker flecks like gold floating in them, mixed in with lighter shades of gray and soft streaks of violet. Because it's time to get up, I muttered. It's 7 a.m. on a Saturday, grammokoi, he said, raising one eyebrow questioningly. His accent was thickly Irish now, almost as if he wasn't bothering to talk properly. The accent was so thick that I couldn't even make out the last words, although that almost sounded more like a foreign language. I quickly looked to the beside table where an old-fashioned analog alarm stood. Shit, he wasn't kidding. It really was 7 a.m. Oh, I thought it was later. Surely Sarah wouldn't be up until at least 10. I could stay a little longer. Good, Alexander said, as if I'd spoken the last words out loud. He was tightening his arms around me, his head dipping forward into my hair where he breathed in deeply. Then he relaxed backwards into the pillows again. Thick waves of contentment and happiness rolling off him. Was he really so happy to hold me like this? To wake up with me? We lay quietly for a while, but I wasn't tired anymore. Alexander's breathing was very deep and even, but every time I moved, he'd shift his arms to make sure I was comfortable. Every now and then, he'd be softly stroking my back or play with a strand of hair. Alexander. Or... While we were like this, he probably wouldn't mind answering a few questions for me. I was dying to find out what was up with his accents. I couldn't believe he really had two. Yes, agahamakoi, he replied. I could hear it clearly now. The last words were definitely a different language. Where are you really from? I asked, daring to look up to his face again. I wanted to see to make sure I didn't miss anything. I wanted to know if he was honest with me. It seemed like the Irish accent was something he hid. His face was very open, though. He looked pleased, in fact. Ireland, we all are, he replied, smiling fondly as if remembering pleasant things. Then why do you talk with a British accent at school? And if Bob and Sarah are Irish too, then why do they talk American? The questions tumbled from my lips now that my curiosity was getting the chance. He chuckled, his chest vibrating like last night, but I was so focused on his face that the wave of pleasure that ran through me went unnoticed enough. I wriggled around a bit though, my skin feeling as if I'd just been tickled. I really don't like the sound of American. Don't ask me why. I don't really know, he smirked, all traces of accent suddenly gone. His voice sounded strange, now that he talked properly, American all of a sudden. See, I have a knack for languages and accents, but the Irish is harder to understand for most people. He interrupted himself to laugh. If I talk Irish too much, it's hard not to slip into Gaelic for me. I lived a long time in London. British is almost natural to me as well. Bob and Sarah. They want to fit in a little more at school. That's why you can't hear their accent. Maybe they think people won't notice we're related either that way. He laughed again as he finished explaining. It was very clear that he was in a good mood now. I smiled at him. Oh, so that lullaby and those words you keep saying, they're Gaelic? What do they mean? He nodded slowly, smiling warmly at me. It sent butterflies flapping around in my stomach. Yes, the lullaby was something my mother used to sing to me when I was little. It's too long to translate, but it's about the moon and a human falling in love with a Baoban Sith. I wondered what that was. Baobin Sith, he pronounced it like Baven She, and that reminded me of the name Banshee. My mother had told me a story about that creature, a spirit woman, luring men and killing them. I wondered if they were the same. And the words you said? Tea. Alexander cast me a lazy smile. Gramokroye? Yes, those. You said them last night a few times and twice this morning, I said, nodding. The way he said them made me think they meant something sweet, an endearment. Someday I will tell you, with a laugh he added, Gramokroye, Brittany. I frowned. But I want to know now. Who knew if I'd ever be in the position again to ask? We might not even talk again after this. It would be better if we didn't. He could lose his job after all, if the school found out he'd slept with me. That sounded wrong in my head. It made me blush. Alexander chuckled. I promise I will tell you one day. This time, I couldn't prevent the sigh escaping my lips at the vibration of his chest. My eyes closing as I shivered, unwanted thoughts of running my hands across his skin and kissing his amazingly soft lips again shooting through my mind. It didn't help that he suddenly ran his hands over my shoulders down to my waist, his fingertips skimming across the exposed skin at the bottom, where my shirt had ridden up just a little. Any more questions? He asked softly. Aren't you afraid you'll lose your job? I asked, equally as soft. It really worried me. He had his 2 siblings to take care of. I didn't want to cause problems. Wait, what was I thinking? We wouldn't start a relationship anyway. He was just being nice because of last night. Why would I lose my job? He wondered, one of his hands back in my hair, running soft fingers through it to disentangle the knots. It's against school policy, I mumbled, feeling my face heat up again. I meant just the fact that he was holding me in his arms right now, with me lying on top of him, in his bed. Not anything more serious, but still. I don't care about that agramo kroi. He was smiling, his eyes twinkling in amusement. He knew exactly what I was thinking. But, I spluttered, don't you need the money? Run one, I work at the school because I like to teach, not because I need to. He tucked the strand of hair he'd been playing with behind my ear. Oh, that was a new word. I own several restaurants and shops. I own several successful companies. If I didn't want to, I wouldn't have to work a single day in my life. There's no reason to worry about that job. You're more important than that, the last, he added completely serious, his hand tilting my chin upward so he could look me in the eye. Flustered, I said, will you at least tell me what a ruin means? I knew I screwed up on the pronunciation. He laughed. A run, it means something like my dear. There was a soft knock at the door, and then Sarah's muted voice said, Are you too decent? Blushing scarlet, I sat up straight. Oh, she already knew I was here, and she thought we were doing something. Of course, der Führer Og, come in, Alexander said, his hands grabbing my hips to hold me still. I was straddling him now, the blanket falling down around me to reveal that I was still fully dressed and that he only wore sweats, riding low on his hips. His chest was a vision in the early morning light, although looking at the alarm told me it was now nearly 10 a.m. Chiseled planes and shades that defined the muscles even more made it hard to peel my eyes away from him, and I knotted my hands into fists on my knees to keep them still. Morning, Sarah chirped happily as she stepped into the room. She was already dressed in a flowing white and blue summer dress, looking every bit like a supermodel. She held a phone in her hand that she stuck out to Alexander. Master Barati on the phone for you. Alexander took the phone with his left hand, his right still holding my hip. It felt a little as if he was making sure I wouldn't get up. Within seconds, he was talking low and quickly into the mouthpiece. What he spoke sounded very much like Italian. God, how many languages and accents did this man speak? Sarah's voice pulled me away from staring at him. I'm sorry. I should have gone looking for you sooner last night. Her blue-eyed gaze showed nothing but sincerity. I squirmed a little uneasily. It's all right. It wasn't your fault. Besides, you shouldn't have to babysit me. I repeated the words from last night, but I didn't feel the urge to add that we were both the same age this time. I know, but still. I should have. Ugh, I don't know. Done something right? Sarah exclaimed. It was obvious she was feeling very guilty about it for some reason. Sarah, I told her, trying to keep my voice as light as possible. It was hard because of the awkward position I was in, on top of her brother who wouldn't let me go. I really don't blame you. I know you would have helped me if you could have. Besides, it was very satisfying to kick him and get away myself. I hope he had trouble walking straight after that. Sarah smiled and then giggled. Oh yeah, he was limping badly when he came down the stairs. Think your sister went to take care of him though, stepsister. I corrected her, squirming again when Alexander's thumb started rubbing circles through my t-shirt. Yeah, stepsister, you two are nothing alike. Don't worry, everyone knows that, Sarah agreed. She winked and then nodded towards Alexander. He was still on the phone and seemed oblivious to our conversation. Tell him breakfast is in 10, okay? With those words, she spun around and darted back out the door closing softly behind her without making as much as a sound. Great, she didn't seem surprised at all to see me there. It almost seemed as if she was expecting it, or as if she was used to this kind of thing. I cast one look at Alexander to see that he was still on the phone, not looking at me but at something on the ceiling. Now, to get up quickly, I shifted a little to the side, but his hand kept me from moving more than an inch. The other direction yielded the same result, and pushing up with my knees didn't help at all. I didn't even see the muscles in his arms tense as I moved, even though he must have been using quite a lot of strength. Despite that, his grip on my hip felt soft and didn't hurt. In fact, it was nice how warm his hand was and that thumb was still rubbing circles. It sent tingles through my body that I didn't really want to be feeling right now. I tried grabbing his hand and moving it away, but even pulling at his little finger didn't yield any results. Was I that weak, or was he just unbelievably strong? I could see he was muscular, but he couldn't be that strong now, could he? A little fed up, I contemplated hitting him, wriggling around impatiently. "What are you doing?" Alexander suddenly asked, the Irish accent sounding heavy again. He was still holding the phone in one hand, but it appeared he was done. His eyes were a smoldering black again. "Trying to get up?" I exclaimed, showing him how frustrated I was by now. Why didn't he just let me go? To add power to my words, I took my fist and went to punch his stomach. I seriously doubted it would hurt him, but it could at least help vent some of my frustration. Before I could hit him though, he caught my fist in his hand, the phone suddenly precariously balancing on the nightstand. Shocked by how fast he'd moved, I stared at his face. "What the? Wah. Don't do that, you could hurt yourself a gramokroy," he said rather huskily. Sitting up so I was balanced on his lap, still straddling him, but his chest was pressing against me. Feeling angry for some reason, I huffed, "Can you at least let me up?" "Breakfast is ready." I knew I sounded annoyed, but I didn't care. "What's wrong? Did Sarah say something or run?" He wondered, his expression confused and a little worried, although his eyes were still dark. Both hands were on my hips now, still preventing me from getting up. Why was Sarah not surprised I was here? Is she used to finding her friends or other students in your bed or something? I clasped both my hands over my own mouth in shock at the words that had just tumbled out. Where the hell did that come from? Alexander still looked confused, but then suddenly his expression cleared to make place for amusement. "Agramokroi, are you jealous?" This time he didn't stop me from hitting his chest. I winced slightly at the hard impact. Even from this close, it felt like hitting stone. Of course not. I assure you, there's never been a student in my bed before. "You are the only one." He was still smiling as he said it, but something in his eyes told me he was deadly serious. Especially his last words, they seemed to mean so much more. Then why wasn't Sarah surprised? I muttered, still determined to get all my questions answered. I was still blushing and I felt almost embarrassed about what I was asking now. After all, this didn't mean anything. He was just being nice because of Fort. "Sarah doesn't get surprised easily. She always seems to know everything," Alexander said, shuddering at the thought as if he was a little creeped out about that. "Seriously, that girl has ears and eyes everywhere." I nodded slowly. I had noticed all those looks and knowing smiles she'd been giving me and Alexander too, come to think of it. Wait, what did that mean? Did she think we had feelings for each other or something? "We need to get up. Breakfast is nearly ready," I told him. He nodded. "Did I answer all your questions? A gramo quoi?" But his hands had finally let go off my hips so I could get up. I frowned at him as I hurriedly got up, nearly tumbling to the floor in my haste. Not really. I felt cold now that I wasn't touching him anymore and a little less whole, but that didn't make any sense. "I'm going to get dressed. Bye." With that, I was darting out the door, his laughter chasing me all the way to my room. What he was finding amusing, I didn't know. Probably my hasty and ungraceful exit. Great, I just made a fool out of myself. After I got dressed and made my way to the kitchen, I could already hear voices drifting up. Was that Bob talking? Since when did he talk so much? When I reached the kitchen, they were all sitting there already, all off them looking like the picture of perfection. Bob's mohawk for once, not messy, but straight, and of course Alexander wearing loose jeans and a tight black tee. I sat down hesitantly. All three of them were looking at me. Sarah with an incredibly happy expression on her face, while Bob looked more serious. But a smile was tugging at his eyes. He had a tinge of concern mixed in there, though. Alexander looked the picture of satisfaction. He seemed to practically glow, and his eyes, when they met mine, seemed to hold a spark. "Morning, Bob," I said, trying to ignore how uncomfortable I felt. Disguising my unease by starting to eat, it seemed they were all already done. Was I that late? They picked up their conversation easily. It was about something they'd done last weekend. A hunt they'd all enjoyed quite a lot. I wondered about the fact that they went hunting. I didn't think Sarah was the type for that at all. Hunting boys, now that I would understand coming from her. The doorbell rang and Sarah was already halfway out the door. "That's probably your chauffeur, Brittany." My chauffeur? I hadn't arranged for anyone to pick me up? So what was Dannis doing here? I was hurrying after her, my breakfast forgotten. Dannis? I didn't ask you to get me. How did you know I was here? I called out, but I stopped in my tracks when I reached the front door, shocked by the sight before me. Sarah was pressed against the door jamb, her arms wrapped tightly around Dannis's neck, one hand in his blonde curls. Her legs she'd wrapped around his waist, pulling him even closer, and I didn't want to know where the hell his hands were. Most importantly, they were kissing like their lives depended on it. My mouth hanging open, I just stared. What had gotten into them? This was just the weirdest thing ever. Sarah hadn't tried anything with a guy last night as far as I'd seen, but now she was making out with Dannis, whom she hadn't met until just now? Come, I'll drive you home. They'll be busy for quite some time, Alexander said, appearing by my side and pulling me with him out the door. He picked up his keys from that silver dish along the way. One last look as the door closed behind us told me they were, still kissing, making their way up the stairs now. I cringed. I didn't want to see that. We didn't talk in the car as he drove me home, and the silence was comfortable despite of this morning and last night. I guessed our shared shock of seeing Sarah and Dannis like that had something to do with it. After a while, I ventured to ask, "What was that?" Alexander didn't immediately answer, but said then, "A reunion." It sounded like he had to think about what he said. There hung more to that single word then, just a simple reunion. I didn't think they'd met before anyway. I had talked to Sarah about Dannis, and she had shown no sign of recognition after all. When the big, cold house that I was supposed to call home came into view, I couldn't suppress the sigh from escaping my lips. He pulled up into the driveway effortlessly and left the engine idling. "Hand me your phone," he said, preventing me from getting out of the car. Shocked, I stared at him for a moment. My phone? What did he want with that? I pulled it out of my pocket and handed it to him, though, when he held out his hand and looked at me. It was a look that said, "You better obey me." I'd only seen him look at a few people like that before, kids in class that were disrupting the lesson. I dropped my old crappy phone in his hand and shrugged. Why? He was already typing something into my phone. "I'm giving you my number." He glanced at me as he handed me the phone back, his face completely serious and tinged with worry. "Do not hesitate to call me, okay? If there's something wrong, anything at all. Or if you just want to hear a friendly voice," as he spoke. A soft caress touched my mind, easing some of my anxiety and worry. It didn't take away the sense of foreboding, though. Dannis being sent to pick me up? Did that mean my father was home? Okay, I blushed again. I wanted to stay in his car and go back home with him. I didn't want to go back to this house ever again. Nothing but unhappy memories so far, and being with this family was anything but nice, ever. I felt a little like Cinderella sometimes. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to get out. A hand on my arm stopped me. "I mean it, Britt. Call me if there's something going on. If you want to get away, I'll come to pick you up again." His eyes were large and stormy as always, but now also filled to overflowing with concern. I nodded and forced a smile to show him I was fine. He didn't seem to buy it. "One last thing, Britt. Will you tell me his name?" His voice sounded remote and controlled again, steel covered with silk. I shivered. I knew exactly who he meant. "Fort, that's all I know." Alexander nodded and let go of my arm at last. I hurried out of the car into the front door. Rubbing my arm where he'd touched me, the skin was tingling. I waited at the front door to watch him drive away, waving half-heartedly. When the flashy red car was gone, I turned and knocked on the door. I didn't have my keys on me. They were still in my bag in the guest room in Alexander's house. With Sarah and Dannis's shocking surprise, I'd completely forgotten about my bag. I took a very deep breath and squared my shoulders as I stepped into the house. The maid who'd opened the door smiled sympathetically at me and pointed towards the living. "Your father is in there." I knew he was home. As I stepped into the living room, my father didn't waste time and started yelling at me right away. Occasionally helped by my stepmother, with Jennifer piling on lies about my bad behavior. There was just one thing keeping me standing all that time: Andy. His nanny was nowhere to be seen, but Stephanie held his hand in a bruisingly tight grip. If he tried to get away, either my dad or she would snap at him that he should stand still, that he had to know what his big sister was doing wrong. It made my blood boil. The poor kid was crying relentlessly. He knew it was all lies, but it hurt him to know they were hurting me. It was very hard to drive away. I knew she was hurting, although I didn't know why. The urge was very strong to barge into that house and kill everything and anyone that was causing it. I knew that she wouldn't appreciate it if I did. She was a gentle soul. I knew she wouldn't be happy if I went and killed that fort either, but I wasn't gonna let him get away with assaulting my mate. Grabbing my phone, I snapped it open, dialing a number from my contact list. I didn't bother restraining the growl that ripped from my throat as the phone was picked up. Thomas, I demand repayment. Your son assaulted my mate. The words were pulled together in a long snarl and my mouth twisted around the word son. I didn't hold my fangs back as they pushed through my gums, fueled by my anger. The man on the other side of the line growled as well before saying, "Change your tone, vampire." As the alpha of the pack of werewolves in town, he was one of the few that wasn't scared of me. In a fight I would still win easily, but his rank allowed him more privileges. I'll be damned if I will. Your son tried to rape my mate last night. I have a right to rip his fucking head off. Be happy that I haven't done so yet and went to you instead. To anyone human, my words would have been unrecognizable, but Thomas had no trouble understanding. "Since when do you have a mate? Nobody knows about that," Thomas said, his voice calm now. Although I could tell he was offended by my way of talking. He was letting his alpha side show, trying to redirect conflict. "I found her this week. Thomas, she doesn't even know yet, but that doesn't change anything. He still tried to rape her last night," I explained, my initial anger having burned away now. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "That means Fort didn't know she was yours, though." "You can't expect him to stay away if she's not marked," Thomas said, defending his son and future alpha. It was his very own pride I was laying accusations to as well. "Thomas?" I growled his name again. "That doesn't take away the fact that he tried to rape someone, whether she's my mate or not. That's against the rules. It's wrong. He needs to be punished." It was quiet for a moment before I heard Thomas sigh. "Will you allow me to punish him? Or do you demand your right of repayment?" The monster inside me wanted nothing more than to get the chance to pound Fort's face to mush, but my rational side said, "Fine, but if there's another incident, I won't be so nice. Be glad I came to you first. You know I didn't have to do that." I knew that if Fort showed up at school on Monday, all battered and bruised, Britt would know I was responsible for it. She must have seen the anger on my face when she told me the name. She probably thought I didn't know who he was, though. "Nathan, I will deal with this. No pack member of mine gets away with attempted rape. I just want to know one thing." "So, what?" The angry beast inside me roared. After this, I knew I had to go out to feed. The anger had made me hungry, and I needed to stay in control. "Are you certain it was Fort? And that he really tried to rape her? Do you have proof?" Thomas's voice was completely reasonable, and I knew he had to ask to make sure the punishment he would hand out was just. I smelled him on her. "Jer." I saw her memories. They were very clear, I said, my voice no longer distorting into growls and snarls, but tight and controlled. I was fighting a war with the hunger and the desire to protect her, and also the desire to go to her and make her mine. "Your bond is coming along fast, then." "Very well, I will make sure Fort knows his place in the future." "Do you wish to be there when I punish him?" Thomas sounded resigned now. I had known when I called him that I would get my way. "No, I will leave it to you. If I catch him again, though, I won't be so lenient." With that, I snapped the phone shut. As I got out of my car and hurried back into my house, I sighed regretfully. I was going to miss her, and I knew I wouldn't be seeing her again until Monday in school. It didn't help that Sarah had just found her own mate, a witch, one that knew about the bond and recognized it just as she had. It wasn't fair that they got to be with each other right away, and that I had to tread so carefully to make sure I didn't scare her. I so badly wanted to just hold her and smother her in kisses and take away all her pain. Thinking of her made me aware of her mind, so far away from me now that it felt like an elastic band pulled way too tightly. She was hurting, and she was mad too. The anger was making her blood boil hot. It made me sad that all of her feelings were tinged with resignation. It felt as though she was giving up the fight, just waiting for the storm to pass. Inside the house, I could still smell her scent. It lingered on the chair she'd sat in and hung in the corridor upstairs. My acute vampire hearing easily picked up the sounds of sex coming from Sarah's room. I groaned at the unfairness of it all as I slumped down on the couch. "Don't worry, Alex, you've come a long way to earning her trust this weekend. Besides, at least you have a mate," Bob said as he sat down in a chair opposite me. I gave him a sympathetic look and nodded. "I suppose you're right. It's just getting harder each time to restrain myself. And fighting to keep my fangs retracted all the time around her. Amongst other things," I added the last softly, knowing he'd hear. Bob laughed. "Just a week or maybe 2 more? She already loves you?" I nodded. "Yeah, I know. I don't want to overwhelm her. I just want to..." I broke off, feeling embarrassed suddenly. I was starting to sound like this really stupid, love-struck idiot. Bob cast me a knowing look and then got up. "Go out and feed, okay?" It'll make you feel better, and it'll help you control yourself if you're full. I'll join you if you want, but I'm guessing you prefer to be alone. You're not much fun to be around anyway. You're all lovey-dovey. I shook my head at my brother, again realizing how much older he really was. I was the undecided leader of our group. I was simply stronger, faster, and had more vampiric talents than either of my siblings. But Bob was 3 years older, and the way he looked at me now told me he hadn't forgotten how it was to be the older brother. The only talent Bob really possessed was sensing moods. He couldn't influence them whatsoever, but he often knew exactly how people felt. Sarah was strongly telepathic. It was something she often combined with Bob whenever they wanted to avoid something I'd told them to do. I hurried up the stairs, reaching my own bedroom in a flash. There, I realized my bed still smelled very strongly after her. The scent so delicious that I just had to lie down and smell my pillow, breathing in deeply. After a while, too shortly, I became aware of the sounds emitting from Sarah's bedroom. I couldn't stand hearing that for very long, so with a reluctant sigh, I got changed and then hurried out the door. Time to hunt then. Although I was sure nothing would really appeal to me now. Not when I hadn't yet marked Britt and made her well and truly mine. She was crying now, so I was guessing she was alone in her room. Every fiber in my being was yelling at me to go to her and make her feel better. Yet, I couldn't just go there and climb in through her window. And the 1942, I loved that I would got just 11 CO working to they were nite. 11 CO wears 11 T. Did I really have ugly, dull eyes and plain features? I knew my hair was always tangled because of the slight curls. I suppose Stephanie and Jennifer were right. I really wasn't very pretty. I had never considered myself to be beautiful, but I never thought I was ugly either. Now, I shook my head at my silliness. Just because Jennifer had been pointing out all my flaws yesterday for hours on end didn't mean it was true. Still, I opted for wearing loose, more concealing jeans and a hoodie to go over my sleeveless shirt. I covered my figure, and it was after all getting colder outside now that summer was over. There was no sense in dressing prettily. My families would only take it as more incentive to call me a whore. When I got downstairs, I spotted my baby brother in the kitchen. Just as he saw me too, apparently because he jumped from his chair, nearly knocking it over, and rushed towards me to hug my legs as tightly as he could. His face was a little pale and drawn, and there was a red blotch on his left cheek. I felt angry all over again and picked his little frame up from the floor, hugging him tightly. No matter that he was getting a little too heavy for it. "Giant, are you okay?" I asked him softly, stroking my hands over his pretty auburn curls. After I'd gotten home on Saturday and my father had been done yelling and lecturing me, I'd been sent to my room and locked in there. I hadn't seen Andy since, but I knew he'd been trying to get to me. Even daring throwing a tantrum at Stephanie when my dad wasn't around. It's when he'd earned the red blotch, I guessed. Stephanie must have hit him. "I miss Mommy and home," he whispered, and I could feel him starting to cry again. His sobs muffled against my shoulder. Behind him at the kitchen counter stood his nanny, and for once she didn't look stern, her face softened by a look of compassion. I shot her a grateful smile as I softly rocked my baby brother to and fro. "It's okay, Giant, I miss her too. But you remember our dreams, right, honey? About getting our own place? Eating ice cream all the time?" I told him gently. Usually that would cheer him up, and then we'd spend hours fantasizing about all the things we'd do and have. Today, my baby brother just kept on crying, shaking his head and balling his little fists. "Those are just silly dreams, Brittany Lee," Stephanie says. "You can't take me away when you leave." She says it's against the law. The tone of his voice, so solemn, told me he believed that now, and that I should too. No, Andy. Don't listen to her. I will find a way. I promise. I'm not going to abandon you. Got it? Oh, boo-hoo, how touching. Jennifer snapped from behind me all of a sudden. I stiffened and clutched Andy a little more tightly to me. Then I sat him down in his chair again. When I turned around to cast a look at Jennifer, she quickly looked away. Was that sympathy I saw in her eyes for a moment? I wasn't sure. "Be strong for me, okay, Giant?" I whispered as I ruffled his hair. He nodded, and albeit still sniffling a little, he squared his little shoulders and smiled at me. The sad look didn't leave his pretty golden eyes, though. "Let's go, slut." "Come on, I don't want to be late." Jennifer sashayed out of the kitchen towards the garage. I must have been mistaken about that look. She was once again dressed in a short, revealing dress. Black this time. Her hair and makeup done like a model. I kissed Andy on top of his head and followed her. For some reason, Dannis had just quit his job, right when my father wanted to fire him instead for not being there when he called him on Sunday. But with Dannis gone, it meant I had to ride with Jennifer to school. That was something she definitely didn't like. When we were nearly there, she suddenly stopped and said, "Get out! You're walking the last bit." I didn't hesitate getting out, even though I knew it meant I'd be late. If I didn't, she'd tell her mother another lie about something I'd done. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let them yell like that at me anymore in front of Andy. It was killing him. When I reached school, I wasn't as late as I thought I'd be. Anger at my so-called family for hurting little Hay had given my feet speed, it seemed. Jennifer, of course, was right at the center of attention, with everyone staring at her expensive car. I slipped inside unnoticed when I saw neither Bob or Sarah were there yet. In fact, Sarah didn't show up for her entire first period, but I was glad to see that Bob was there in second period. He cast me a gentle smile and patted my hand as if to tell me everything was okay. When I asked him where Sarah was, he said, "Still at home. Probably doing something dirty with Dannis." "What? She's skipping to be with Dannis? Does Alexander know?" I whispered loudly. Luckily, the teacher didn't seem to hear. Bob nodded. "Of course," he told the principal she's sick. Why the hell does he help her skip school so she can be with her? Boyfriend? Weren't brothers usually all protective about that sort of thing? Surely he knew she'd be having sex or something. Wouldn't he want to prevent that? Bob smiled a closed-mouthed smile. Trust me, he couldn't keep them apart even if he wanted to. We're just hoping that they get all of this. Lust out of their systems during the day so that we can at least sleep at night without having to hear them. I felt myself flushing scarlet. Wow, was it that bad? I thought Sarah had more sense in her than that. From Dannis, at least I could understand. He was a guy after all. Although he had been nice enough to send me a text on Sunday, apologizing about not picking me up, explaining that he'd quit his job and that obviously he didn't want to go on a date anymore, but that he'd still make it up to me for saving him from my sister. When class was over, Bob pulled me aside in the corridor. "Bob, I'm going to be late if you don't let me go." I told him seriously, but still, I didn't walk away as he looked around, obviously waiting for the hall to empty somewhat. "Listen, Brittany, I really like you, and so does Sarah," Bob started. "In fact, I think we'd become good friends in such a short time, and I'm glad." I frowned. "Okay, what was this all about?" "Now, my brother, he really likes you, okay? Give him a chance. He's a good guy, and he deserves a girl like you." Bob said those words in such serious tones that I could only stare and gape at him. Did Bob just seriously tell me to go out with his brother? Who was, in fact, at least 5 years older than me and also my teacher, and therefore it was totally against the rules. It wasn't illegal, we were both legal adults, but it was still against school policy and he could lose his job. Bob was already gone, off to his next class when I finally started moving. I kept thinking, to hell with the rules, Alexander had said himself that he didn't care about the job. My feet had led me to the right classroom all by themselves, and I was already knocking on the door before I realized I was late. Again. He wasn't going to give me. Yet another detention, was he? But as I opened the door, Alexander glanced at me from the corner of his eyes and then said, "Detention after school. Ms. Baker, take a seat." Flushing crimson, both from embarrassment because everyone was staring at me, and from anger because it was unfair that he kept giving me detentions for things that weren't my fault. I sat down in the back next to the empty seat where Sarah usually sat. During the entire class, Alexander didn't look at me once, but he kept seated behind his desk the whole time, his free hand holding the desk in a tight grip. I was constantly assaulted by waves of desire, all of them focusing on Alexander and how badly I just wanted to be as near to him as possible. Touching his skin, running my fingers through his silky hair, and breathing in the scent of him. The tension between us was so thick that my skin was tingling with it and my cheeks felt constantly on fire. I couldn't understand how no one seemed to pick up on it, nor why it was so strong now when it seemed all right during the weekend. I was concentrating so hard on staying in my seat that I didn't realize the bell had rang, signaling the end of the period. It was very lucky that Alexander hadn't called on me during class. I wouldn't have heard him if he had. His body beside my desk all of a sudden made the tingling on my skin even worse. As I looked up at him and met his stormy gray eyes, it almost felt as if I could tell what he was feeling, happy and worried, and something else barely kept in check. I blushed when I realized I could identify that last bit as lust. At least now I knew it wasn't just me. Wait, what was I thinking? I didn't know that was what he was feeling. I was starting to imagine things. "You didn't call," was all he said, his voice gentle and solemn. I shook my head. Of course I hadn't called him. First of all, because either my stepmother, dad, or Jennifer would have heard me talking probably, and then they'd have taken away my phone. Secondly, because he was still my teacher, despite what had happened, and I wasn't ready to share stories about my family with him. I doubted he wanted to hear anyway. Hard to knew. I should go get lunch, I stammered, hating myself for being so nervous suddenly. I hadn't felt like this on Saturday around him. I had been really comfortable, in fact. He seemed to know just how to put my mind at ease. Wait, Alexander said as I got up and moved past him. Can I just hold you for a minute? I stared at him in surprise, already nodding because I wanted nothing more than to be in his arms. Still, my more rational mind spluttered. Why? His arms enfolded me and he pulled me flush against his chest, his head coming to rest on top of mine. Warmth spread to my body and the tingling on my skin stopped, to make place for a slow burning that could only be described as incredibly pleasant. It felt like I could finally breathe again and a sudden tension drained from my body, like an elastic band suddenly released from overstretching. I wrapped my own arms tightly around his waist, snuggling even closer and breathing in his amazing scent deeply. I didn't even care about the answer anymore. My rational mind had shut up and was reveling in the contact just as much. After a while, Alexander said softly, "It'll make it easier to get through the day, especially last period." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew he was right. I couldn't see the clock, but I knew he held me longer than a minute. I could care less about that. In fact, when he did let go at last, I couldn't seem to make my own arms release their grip on his waist. He chuckled softly. "Agramo croy, lunch is almost over. In not too long, this classroom will be filling up with students again." Shocked. I unburied my face from his chest to look up at his face. No way. It's only been a few minutes. It's been nearly 30 a run, he smiled gently, one hand coming back to rub my back softly. The other one stroked my cheek, tugging a strand of hair behind my ear. I shook my head in disbelief. No, now! His hands were tugging on my arms, prying them loose and embarrassed. I stepped back. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, eh? I'll just go to my next class." I turned to hurry out the door. "No, I am sorry, Agramokroyi. Because of me, you missed lunch." "I will see you last period," he said, his voice sincere, his eyes stormy and warm. I felt that soft touch on my mind again just as I smiled at him one last time as I darted out the door. Warmth and love filling my head. It was a good thing the halls were still deserted and nobody saw me leave. I felt a little sorry for Bob for letting him eat lunch all by himself, but just having spent those last 30 minutes with Alexander had made me feel really good. I could handle whatever the day decided to dish out now. I was making my way over to the biology classroom, and I couldn't keep the bounce out of my step. I was hurrying just so I could see Alexander sooner. I really had decided to hell with the consequences, it seemed, although I couldn't entirely understand what was going on between us. Did he really like me, the way Bob had implied, or was that in my head and was he just being nice? It didn't feel that way, though. He seemed just as reluctant to let me go on my way during lunch as I had been to leave. Thinking about lunch made my stomach growl hungrily, though, and I patted it a little guiltily. I wasn't watching where I was going exactly because suddenly I slammed into something solid and I knew it wasn't a wall. Whatever it was had just moved into my path. "Hello there, sweetheart. It's nice seeing you again," said a suave voice, one that sends shivers down my spine. Fort. I stepped back immediately, bringing my books up in front of me protectively. "Get lost." "I don't want anything to do with you." My voice contained so much venom that I was surprised he didn't flinch. Jennifer stood right beside him, one hand on his arm as she smiled evilly at me. "Don't talk to him like that, you little slut." Fort cast her a sideways glance that told me he wanted her to shut up and get away from him. He wasn't interested in her. It was me he had his eyes set on. He stepped in closer just to prove it, backing me into a wall. "We had fun, didn't we? Let's hook up again tonight?" He said, one hand reaching out to touch me. I slapped it away as hard as I could and he hissed angrily. Jennifer seemed not to have heard his last words because she pushed in beside me and said, "You're such an idiot. You can't even satisfy one man." "Good thing I was around, isn't that right, baby?" She ran her hands up his arm and pressed herself against him a little now. Fort responded a little distracted, his eyes still focused tightly on me, although he was running them up and down my body. "Those clothes don't suit you at all," he said. Jennifer nodded in agreement, but I knew Fort meant he wanted me to wear something more revealing, whereas Jennifer just thought any clothes I wore looked ugly on me. "Come on, hun, we're going to be late for class if we don't leave now," Jennifer cooed. Fort was nodding and smiled at my stepsister. "Let's ditch class. Go, I'll meet you at your car." He wiggled his eyes suggestively at her. She squealed and immediately started walking, leaving me more or less alone with Fort. She was so stupid. He turned to me again as soon as she was out of sight and prevented me from sneaking away. "You can run, but you can't hide Brittany," he said, his voice low as he backed me into the wall again. Something in his eyes looked a lot like a caged animal. It was trying to claw. "It's way out. You're gonna be mine soon enough." His hand came up to wrap around my throat, rubbing the bare skin there roughly. I swallowed nervously, readying my leg to kick him again. Panic was surging through me as I remembered Friday evening, immobilizing me. Fort was suddenly pulled away from me and a low and angry voice said, "What do you think you're doing?" The voice sounded so angry, in fact, that it was nearly a growl. The impact it had on Fort was very satisfying. He whirled around, his shoulders slumped, and he shook his head. "Nothing, Mr. Clinton. I'm going to class now." His voice was very demure, but as he all but ran away, he cast one look over his shoulder, hate-filled. Alexander didn't seem to be impressed in the least as he watched the guy leave, his shoulders shaking with suppressed rage. Then he turned around to look at me. "Are you all right, Brittany?" I nodded, but at the use of my full name, I realized the hallway was anything but deserted. Students, mostly from the biology class, were all staring. I shivered and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Clinton, thank you." We all filed into the classroom and I hurried to the back, glad that I could sit down because my legs felt a little wobbly. So I had been mistaken. Just a hug, albeit a long one, wasn't enough to make me strong enough to face anything for the rest of the day. It was of course silly of me to forget that he attended school here as well and that I didn't have the chance to run into him. But I really had forgotten with all the worrying about Dannis and the fact that my father had been home this weekend. Alexander started class, handing out assignments. His voice sounded normal to anyone but the most observant. To me, he still sounded angry, but when I met his stormy eyes, I felt a wave of love and concern wash over me. I nodded slowly, breathing in deeply to show him I was fine. During the entire lesson, he kept walking around the room from person to person as he explained and helped people. Every time he was near me, he'd brush his fingers across exposed skin on my arm and twice even across the back of my neck. It helped to keep my mind of things, well, bad things at least. By the end of class, I was thinking mostly about him again, and that tension was back, differently. It wasn't as heavily there as that morning, but it still made my skin tingle. When Alexander at last dismissed the class, he reminded me loudly that I did have a detention again. I hadn't moved anyway, but I guessed he said it for the benefit of the other students, so that they knew I had a legit reason to stay behind. When the last one was out the door, he held up a hand. "Stay here, I'll be right back, okay?" He was out the door before I could reply. With a shrug, I pulled out my homework and started on that, only a little disappointed that he hadn't come over to hold me again. I was really confused now. I knew I wanted to be with him. The way he made me feel said enough, despite what I had been thinking before I'd found myself falling harder for him every time I saw him. But it just wasn't clear to me what he felt and wanted from me. Did he feel like I did? Did he really think being with me was worth risking losing his job? Or was he still just being nice because I was friends with his sister? A package was dropped in front of me. "Here, you must be hungry. You missed lunch because of me." I looked up to find Alexander standing in front of me, leaning forward on my desk to peer into my face. He was smiling and nodded encouragingly at the food in front of me. It was just a simple sandwich and a bottle of orange juice. I dug in hungrily. It tasted absolutely amazing and was nearly done when I realized he had missed lunch too. "Oh, I blushed madly at him and he grinned. "I already ate a gramochoye." I finished the last bit hurriedly and took a few sips of the drink before bending back over my homework. I had just stuffed myself like a pig in front of him. How embarrassing. As if he read my mind, though he said, "I should not have kept you from your lunch. You were very hungry. I forget sometimes. You need more food than I do." He sounded genuinely remorseful, as if he had done something horrible. He had moved back a little to sit down on the edge of the desk in front of mine, and as I looked up, his stormy gray eyes were focused intently on my face. "Tell me about yourself," he demanded then. "What?" I stuttered out, surprised by the request. "I want to get to know you. Will you tell me about yourself?" he asked gently. A soft smile was curving his lips, and I wanted nothing more than to kiss them. Blushing again, I shrugged. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he replied. The look in his eyes told me he was deadly serious. He really wanted to know everything about me. Well, I have a little brother that I absolutely love to death," I told him honestly. Thinking about Andy made me a little sad again, and I could tell he noticed because he hurried to say, "Is he well?" I nodded, and then I did something I didn't expect at all. The urge to tell him everything was just too strong. The words rolled from my lips on their own accord. "He's as well as can be. He misses mom a lot in our old home. Nothing is the same anymore now that we live with my dad. Stephanie, our stepmother has no time for him whatsoever, and the nanny is really firm with him. He has so much trouble adjusting. He's really shy around strangers, you know. He doesn't make friends easily. He's always worrying about me too because Jennifer always gets me in trouble. This morning he was crying, and not even reminding him about our dreams could cheer him up. I took a deep breath and realized that tears had formed in my eyes, forcing their way out. Alexander was already on my side of the desk, pulling me swiftly into his embrace. He didn't say anything as he held me. After a while, he pushed me back a little to look at my face. What would you wish to happen? To make him happy? Can you go back to your mother? I shook my head. Our mom's dead. She got really sick one day, pneumonia. Alexander changed his hold on me so that one arm was tightly wrapped around my waist while the other softly stroked my hair. His eyes were filled with compassion, but he didn't say anything like the hated words, "I'm sorry." Instead, he said, "Then, what would you like to happen? I guess you would like to leave your father's home?" Meeting his eyes, I nodded. Yes. He doesn't like either of us anyway. No one seems to like us. I wish I could just take Andy with me and raise him myself. He deserves a good home where he feels safe and loved. And so do you, Britt, Alexander added. I heard a scraping sound, and then suddenly Alexander was sitting down, pulling me with him into his lap. Now, let's talk about lighter things, shall we? He murmured into my hair. It felt so amazing how I fit right in there, with my head tucked underneath his chin and his arms around me. The hard planes of his chest felt soft and warm as I leaned into him. The rest of the hour flew by as Alexander asked me question after question about my likes and dislikes, but he didn't mind when I started asking him my own questions. Sometimes it felt like I already knew the answer to a question before he replied. I had just known, for example, that his favorite color was topaz before he even said so, although it still made me blush when he explained that was because it was the color of my eyes. He was such a charmer. At exactly 5 p.m., he unfurled his arms and helped me get up. He gracefully flowed to his feet and smiled. "Seems like it's time to go home." I nodded and frowned at myself for feeling so sad about that fact. I would get to see him again tomorrow. Besides, I really needed to spend time with Andy and cheer him up. I had to show him I wasn't going to give up. Alexander followed me out of school, a comfortable silence stretching around us. The school was deserted, and so was the parking lot. Obviously, everyone already left. No wonder he hadn't been worried about anyone walking in on us. I stared a little morosely at the empty parking lot, knowing Jennifer had left without me and that I'd have to walk home. Dannis had, after all, quit his job, so I couldn't expect him to come and pick me up. Alexander followed my look and smirked suddenly. "Seems like I get to take you home, a gros McCroy." He took hold of my hand and tugged me towards his flashy red car. I couldn't help but feel a little happy about that. It meant more time together with him. The car ride was quiet, and I found myself thinking about us again. Did he really feel the same about me as I did about him? The way he acted really showed that he didn't care. He could lose his job if it was found out. "Alexander?" I asked, determined suddenly to find out where we were standing at. I didn't want to go home and worry about it all night. "Yes, aguamo quoi?" he replied, raising an eyebrow to show me he wanted to know what was on my mind. "What, eh? Where? What's going on between us?" I cringed when I said us. Because it implied there was an us and I didn't know that. It was what I was trying to find out. Alexander stared at me for a moment and then said seriously, "I'm sorry, aguamo croy. I'd been going about this all backwards." I felt my heart sink to the pit of my stomach. See? There was no us. He was just being a good friend, like his siblings. But what about that kiss then? Blushing and feeling hurt and upset, even though it wasn't his fault, but my own stupid mind that had fooled myself. I turned away to look out the window, hoping the rest of the ride wouldn't be awkward now that I had ruined things. "Britt," he took one hand of the wheel and gently folded it around mine. "I want to be with you," he said. My eyes automatically shot to his face, thinking that I must have heard him wrong or that he was joking. There was just no way this insanely handsome man, at least 5 years older than me, would want to be with me. "I want to be with you, Brittany," he repeated, smiling softly at the disbelief on my face. "Would you go out with me on a date? Wednesday, perhaps?" A little numb, I nodded my head. "Yes." My voice sounded breathless, and I mentally scolded myself for sounding like such a dumb, love-struck ninny all of a sudden. He suddenly brought my hand up and pressed a kiss on the top, like an old-fashioned gentleman. His lips were soft, and I could only just suppress a shiver of delight. "We have arrived at Gramokroi," he said, letting go of my hand. I wrenched my eyes away from him to see that he'd parked his car right in front of the big empty house. I took a deep breath, savoring his scent before opening the door. "Be strong, but call me if you need anything at all," he said, and I nodded. Squaring my shoulders, I marched up to the front door. I had to knock because my keys were still in that bag at the Clinton residence. The maid opened and she smiled at me. That was a good sign, probably. Turning, I watched Alexander drive away, ignoring the strange pulling feeling on my heart. Stephanie was apparently gone, out with friends according to the maid, but the rolling of her eyes told me she didn't believe that. Jennifer was out too, on a date with some guy probably, or maybe hanging out with her new besties. Since my father had left this morning again for work, it meant I had the house pretty much to myself with Andy. Good, time to do some major cheering up then. Just done in. When you all in makers. Hi when you ate that is a makers. I when you ever real pie. I when you ever real buy. I when you ever real buy. I when you immediately seemed to help, if only a little. I wondered how Bob had known that fact. He hadn't met his soulmate yet. Although Bob never talked much about those first 10 years he'd been a vampire, neither Sarah or I had been there by his side then. When I got home, Sarah and Dannis had finally decided to be social, it seemed. Or maybe they were simply downstairs because Dannis's body was definitely human and he needed sustenance. Evening, Mr. Clinton," the guy said hesitantly, and I growled in annoyance. "So now you suddenly remember your manners, do you?" I said. I could still vividly remember that afternoon when he'd openly defied me, touching M.Y. Britt while staring me down. Pity. Sarah had already been in the car and hadn't seen him at that time. Dannis visibly shrunk into himself, but he bravely said, "I'm sorry, I did not mean to offend you in any way, and I will do anything to get your approval." Sarah is the most amazing girl I've ever laid eyes on. Sarah, who was sitting beside him, smiled widely at his words and then returned to glaring at me. I shook my head a little confused and then laughed as realization dawned on me. I'm fine with you and Sarah being together. You're soulmates. I know you would never do anything to harm her. Relief flashed across the young witch's features. Despite his brave words, it was obvious he didn't want to fight me. He knew he'd lose. His magic wasn't enough to do serious damage to me, and the spells that could took too long to be useful in an open fight. I'm referring to that day in the parking lot. Dannis, when you defied me and touched M.Y. mate, I explained, but I didn't feel angry about that anymore. I was just grumpy because I was still yearning so strongly to go to Britt. It was hard focusing on anything other than the link between her mind and mine. After today, it seemed to have gotten much stronger again. I suspected strong enough even for Britt to realize the connection was there. "Dannis, Sam," Sarah exclaimed, slapping his shoulder playfully. "You flirted with Brittany?" The blonde-haired witch looked a lot like a little angel, a cherub. Although his body was all hard planes and angles, showing clearly that he was a man and not a boy. He shook his blonde curls from his eyes and said, "Brittany needed a friend. That family of hers is horrible. They're all so mean to her, she gets the blame of everything." I nodded. "Sarah, that stepsister, doesn't want to be seen with her. She makes her walk to and from school if she's even a second too late. I want you to pick her up tomorrow morning. As her friend, it's not weird if you do that, right?" I left the unspoken words hanging. I would be glad to do it, but as her teacher people, we're bound to notice, and we didn't want that. I knew I'd told Britt several times that I didn't care about the job, but I did want to keep it if that was possible. I preferred being able to see her in school and keep an eye on her there. Not just Fort seemed interested in her. Nearly all the supernatural students at the school paid extra attention to her. I wasn't very strongly telepathic, not like Sarah, but I had still picked up quite a lot of thoughts that I didn't want to hear. The boys at school, mostly the wolves, had no clue how close they'd come each day to me ripping their throats out. Everyone knew that I did not share, but as long as Britt wasn't marked as mine, they didn't know I had claimed her. I sighed. Maybe I should let the entire supernatural community know. Calling a meeting might not be a bad idea. No, I don't think that would help Alex, and of course I'll drive her to school from now on. Now that Dannis isn't doing it anymore, that's a great idea. Sarah was reading my mind, of course. Why? A meeting to tell everyone she's mine would at least keep the kids at school in check. Fort was bothering her again in the hallway today, which reminds me, I need to call Thomas and tell him he's gone soft. He promised me this would stop. Dannis shivered, obviously not used to the easy way I talked about the supernatural community. I was, if not their leader, I let the elders run the town, definitely able to demand pretty much everything I wanted. Thomas is out of town on business. Alexander. That's probably why Fort is running wild like that. He thinks he can get away with things when the alpha's not around. Bloody Kid is bullying a lot of the young witches as well. He calls us inferior. At the last words, Dannis spat angrily and then buried himself in the plate of mac and cheese, embarrassed by his outburst. I see. So he hasn't been punished yet. I nodded. That made sense. Although it pissed me off that Thomas had refrained from telling me he was away when I was on the phone with him. I can tell Britt is nearly ready to accept you, Alex. She said yes when you asked her on a date, didn't she? That's why you should wait with a meeting. She's smart and sensitive. She would notice if half the student body started treating her differently all of a sudden. Besides, I think she'd appreciate it if you introduced her properly instead of going behind her back. She's stubborn, you know. She'd be pissed if you did that. Sarah shared some of her insights, and I couldn't disagree. Britt was stubborn, all right. It's what had kept her upright these past 3 years since she started living with her dad. It's why she was still alive and kicking even though she had to care for her little brother and love him like a mother and father. I really wished I could just take the both of them away from that house. They could live here without a problem. Enough space and money. No lack of people to love the both of them either. With a smirk towards Sarah, I thought Sarah would just love to have a little brother to look after. Showing me she'd heard the thought, Sarah started to smile. It might not be a bad idea to look into the legal aspect of that, Alex. So that when the time is right, we can pluck them both away. I doubt she'll move in if she can't take her brother with her. Dannis groaned. You know how confusing it is to hear only one half of a conversation? I'm no mind reader like you, Miz. But you're right. Brittany would never leave that house without Andy. We talked a while longer, planning what to do with Fort and with Brittany and Andy. We needed a plan. After a while, Sarah started on the topic of the date and started planning that, leaving me with little input and nothing to do. When at long last we all got up to go to bed, it was nearly midnight. There was just one question remaining. Dannis, when are you moving in completely? Or are you moving out, Sarah? Would not be so bad if she moved out, meant I wouldn't have to hear them have sex. Sarah, having heard the thought, laughed, but Dannis replied, Hey, you are okay with me moving in? Of course, why wouldn't I be? If your grandmother is okay with it, then so am I. His grandmother was the crone of the village. It sounded disrespectful to me to call a pleasant old lady crone, but for witches that was a title of honor. It meant she was the leader. My grandmother is very happy for me. She can't wait to meet you, Sarah, Dannis said, turning himself towards Sarah to explain what his grandmother had said and done. I left them and wished Bob good night as I passed him watching TV. It appeared to be some kind of show about vampires. He found those greatly amusing. They were so unrealistic that it was funny. When I crashed in bed, I touched my mind gently to Britt. She was sleeping already. Her dreams were restless, though, filled with worries about her baby brother and surprisingly about me abandoning her. I filled her mind with comforting thoughts about how I loved her and would always protect her. It wasn't hard to paint a picture in her dreams where both she and Andy lived in my house with Bob, Sarah, Dannis, and me. She accepted the image as her own. It was close to what she wanted herself. After that, I turned around and fell asleep myself, hoping that tomorrow would bring me another step closer to winning her heart. Tuesday seemed uneventful compared to Monday, right until the very end, but I liked it that way. Sarah picked me up and drove me to school in the morning, much to Jennifer's chagrin, but she couldn't say anything about it. During third period, I smiled at Alexander the moment I saw him, and as he passed out sheets with information, he brushed my hand. It took the edge of the burning need to go to him and kiss him senseless to hell with the fact that everyone could see us. Jennifer was extremely forward in her way of flirting this class, tugging her shirt lower and her skirt up to reveal more leg. I wondered if guys really thought that was attractive. To me, it just seemed cheap. It was amusing to watch though, even if it was a little disgusting occasionally. But I knew Alexander wasn't interested in her at all. After all, it was me he'd asked out on a date. I did not get a detention that day, and I was almost sad about it. It meant I wouldn't be spending another hour with Alexander and that he wouldn't be the one to take me home. On the other hand, Sarah invited herself over, so today would still be fun. I was the last to leave when the final bell rang, being extremely slow about packing my bag so it wouldn't seem suspicious to the other students. When I was finally done, I looked up to see that Alexander was standing right in front of the door. He cast me one look, questioningly, with one of those eyebrows raised. I slowly made my way over to him, and feeling brave, I reached past him and pulled the door shut. He was chuckling, and I felt my face heating up, but at least he took my bag from me, dropping it to the floor with a heavy thud. Then, without saying a word, he pulled me into his arms, tucking my head under his chin. I shivered, again experiencing that sensation of an elastic band that had been under constant strain finally relaxing. Melting into him, I wrapped my arms around him tightly, ignoring the dirty thoughts that came unbidden. He was running gentle fingers up and down my back in patterns, his breath flitting down my heated cheeks to tickle the sensitive skin just underneath my ears. I wondered what it would feel like if he kissed me there. A groan escaped his lips and he muttered, "You're going to be the death of me, a quarry?" I felt more, then heard the sensual promise in his voice as he pressed me up against the door. I heard the key turn as he locked it, my heart thudding loudly in my chest and my skin on fire, all of it seeming to run in a direct line to the center of my body. One of his hands was on my hip, the lower half of his body pressing into me. The other hand slid up my arm, across the soft skin of my throat, and then pulled my chin up so he could look me in the eye. His normally stormy eyes were so dark they were nearly black, the air around us practically shimmering with the repressed sexual tension. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. He was breathing fast, and I realized that I was too. My own hands were splayed out across his chest, only barely keeping my breasts from touching the hard planes of muscle. I sighed, my breath flitting across his lips, and that's exactly when I felt something snap inside of me. I wanted him, more than anything, and I just knew it was right. The rules were wrong. They couldn't keep us apart. It didn't matter. The connection between us was so clear that I could almost hear his thoughts. He was practically screaming in his mind, "Mine! She's mine! I love her! Kiss her! Kiss me, Britt!" The sentences all short and jumbled, as if the circuits inside were overheated and he wasn't thinking rational anymore. I didn't care because I felt the same. I closed the distance between our lips. Electric sparked and fire burned. I felt like floating as his lips molded against mine. He moaned as I reached a hand up to tug on his hair, pulling him closer, if that was even possible. I felt a very strong sense of satisfaction at being the one that had made him moan. Good, it was an amazing sound. It made things tighten low in my body. He was running one hand through my hair, the other one slid down to cut my bottom, lifting me effortlessly off the floor. I wrapped my legs around his waist, letting out my own moan at the feel of him hard and hot against me. I realized my fingers were trying to undo the buttons on his shirt, and that's when I stopped. Wow. I was trying to undress Alexander. I was trying to undress my teacher. His lips came away from mine, but he didn't seem to notice I wasn't kissing him back anymore. He attached his mouth to my throat, and as if he'd heard my earlier thought, kissed right to that sensitive spot just below my ear. Another moan escaped my throat, and my back arched as a hot wave of pleasure washed over me. Our lower regions connecting, creating a short moment of friction. It brought on another moan that I just couldn't hold in. I felt heat rush to my cheeks, suddenly feeling embarrassed, and that did stop him. He didn't let go, didn't even alter his position in the least. One warm hand possessive on my butt. The evidence of his obvious arousal pressed against the V between my legs, his forehead resting against mine. We were both panting. No, don't be embarrassed. His voice was husky, filled with lust that was nowhere near satisfied, but his eyes had turned to a lighter shade again. He pressed himself closer, and that caused another wave of pleasure to shoot through my body. He was rubbing against me in such a way. I knew he'd seen it on my face because he did it a second time, and then smirked in male satisfaction at the moan rolling off my lips. "I very much love that sound," he whispered hotly, pressing against me again just to hear me moan. "Alexander." His name fell from my lips, and I was shocked to hear how unsteady my own voice sounded. I sounded like sex, I thought, and that made me blush again. "I love it when you say my name like that," Alexander said, again that male satisfaction filling his voice. He ran one hand up my side and then pulled away, allowing me to drop my unsteady legs to the floor. "Sarah is waiting," he said with a roll of his eyes, reaching behind me. He unlocked the door, freeing me to go home and leave him. I was still leaning against the door, not trusting myself to stand up fully after that onslaught on my senses. I was still reeling from his hot kiss, and there was something hot pooled low in my body that craved release. I knew what kind, and I shivered, dirty thoughts after a very dirty moment. Just looking at Alexander, I could still see how aroused he was, but he seemed collected as he stepped away from me to lean against his desk. Bloody man, I was going to be the death of him? How about the other way around? He was smirking as if he'd heard that, and I surprised myself by half growling, "No reading my mind!" Amusement sparkled in his eyes, and he nodded. "Fine, I won't do it again, But only if I get to kiss you like this more often. Deal? Was he mocking me now? Yet I nodded. Deal. It felt like I'd just done something irreversible. There was no going back now. I had officially broken the rules now by making out with my teacher. I felt relieved somehow. Britt, you should go now. Sarah is waiting and she's starting to get impatient, Alexander said. His voice was still husky, but it contained much of his amusement too. I frowned. How do you know? I can read minds, remember? He said, chuckling as if he'd said something very funny. Are you making fun of me now? I couldn't keep a little of the hurt out of my voice. How could he? After we just kissed. It was more than that, way more, but I couldn't quite make myself think about it. He smiled. Of course not, Aguamoshwa. I would never make fun of you. It was a joke. I felt a soft touch on my mind, a caress. It was filled with warmth and love and acceptance. I just couldn't feel upset anymore. All right, I'll see you tomorrow, Alexander, I offered as I picked up my bag from the floor where he dropped it. Just before I opened the door and left, I felt his body heat right behind me, a soft touch of his fingertips underneath my chin. He tilted my head up to meet his eyes. Take care, Brittany. He brushed his lips against mine softly, barely touching, and then he stepped back again. As I walked through the empty hallways, my hand strayed to my lips. They felt hot and a little bruised. It felt absolutely delicious. Sarah was indeed fidgeting impatiently as she stood, leaned against her own shiny silver car. Finally! You took your own sweet time saying goodbye, but she sounded more amused now than angry at having to wait. I'd blushed at her and hurried to get into the car, hoping she wouldn't notice. So, Sarah chirped, are you two an item now? I stared at my friend for a moment, then hurried to look at the window as we peeled away from the parking lot. I could just see Alexander leaving the building and walking to his own car. He was smiling and waved once in my direction. Well, are you? Sarah insisted when I didn't reply. I don't know. We just kissed, I told her, blushing furiously. I hid my face by looking out the window intently, even though I could no longer see Alexander. I find that hard to believe. You have a hickey on your neck, Brittany. That doesn't happen if you just kiss. She was shaking with repressed laughter for some reason. Mortified, I clasped my hand over the spot below my ear. That bastard. Why did he do that? How was I supposed to hide that from Jennifer and Stephanie? He very much wants to make you his. My brother is very possessive when it comes to girlfriends, Sarah said as if reading my mind, although it was probably clearly written on my face. Girlfriend? I asked, or more like squeaked. Was I his girlfriend now? Yeah, he doesn't date much, you know. But when he does, he really cares about you, honey, Sarah explained. And don't worry, I can cover up that mark. No problem, no one at your home will notice. She winked at me. God, that girl really could read minds or something, just like her brother, at least of the three of them. Bob seemed somewhat normal. Sarah snorted inelegantly but said nothing. When we arrived at my house, she pulled out a bag of makeup from under the driver's seat. Adeptly, she dusted something on my neck with cool, certain fingers. She clicked a few times with her tongue, but pretty soon she said, all done, no one will notice. At least I didn't have to wonder about why he seemed so bloody satisfied. He marked me for the whole world to see. At least it would fade in a few days. I'd just have to wear a high collar tomorrow. Oh, before we forget, I got your overnight bag with you. The one you forgot on Saturday. Sarah tugged it out from behind her seat and deposited it in my lap. Great, my keys were in there. I thanked her as I led her to the front door. As I ushered her inside the big house, I drew in a relieved breath when I noticed that again, neither Stephanie or Jennifer were there. Come on, let me introduce you to Andy. The day seemed to fly by, and surprisingly, Andy seemed not the least bit shy around Sarah. Of course I understood that a little. Sarah had that way of making you feel comfortable. She always seemed to know exactly what to say to ease your mind. I kept thinking about Alexander. It was impossible not to, really, the memory of his hands on my skin or his lips. Every time I thought about that, I would start tingling and I couldn't refrain from reaching up to touch that hickey. It really was a good thing Sarah knew how to cover it up. If Stephanie or Jennifer found out, they'd probably give me hell about it. I was just a little pissed at Alexander for doing that. I didn't mind the mark. In fact, I found it rather exciting that he'd wanted to mark me his apparently. But did he have to do it in such a visible spot? I could already hear him argue that it wasn't a proper mark if nobody could see it. After all, it was meant to show the world I was taken. Was I really taken though? Was I his girlfriend now? We hadn't even gone out on a proper date. All this marking me his stuff was rather weird anyway. We were supposed to keep this secret. He would lose his job if the school knew we were dating. Sarah did a good job cheering Andy up even more. She invited him over to her house to come play with the video games Bob had. She assured us both that Bob would love to show them to him. I wasn't too sure about that, but hey, it was her neck, not mine. Of course it meant Andy wanted to go over to the Clinton house first thing tomorrow, which wasn't possible. But Sarah promised him he was welcome anytime. She was even going to make a room for him so he could sleep over if he wanted. I thought that was a little too much, but Sarah cast me a look that said, "Don't disagree with me, I'm saying this for a reason." I was dying to ask her what the hell she thought she was doing, but didn't get the chance till after dinner. Stephanie was surprisingly nice to Sarah. Jennifer wasn't there though, she was out on another date. It was nearly 10 p.m., and at long last, we'd managed to get Andy to go to sleep. He was so hyper about making a friend, even though she was 10 years older, that he didn't want to go to sleep until she'd left. He refused, even though we'd read him 2 bedtime stories together, so at long last, I offered to sing him a lullaby. He wanted Sarah to do that, but she'd laugh saying, "Sorry kid, I can't sing for the life of me. But I'm sure Brittany is really good. Let's both lie down and listen, Kay?" And then Sarah had gracefully lain down beside my baby brother and pretended to fall asleep. Satisfied, Andy had then curled up into my side, demanding I sing that lullaby. I didn't know that many, and I had to think deep and hard. Surprisingly, the song I sang for him was the same one Alexander had sang for me. I didn't know I remembered it that well, but as I started humming the melody, the words found their way to my lips, and soon I was singing. I knew that Sarah had twitched in surprise and then stared at me with open mouth, but I'd chosen to ignore it. Andy was out like a light in 1 minute flat. That had to be a record. Back in my own room, I beat Sarah to it by springing my own question on her before she could ask me about the lullaby. I knew it was a familiar song to her, after all. Alexander said their mother sung that for them when they were little. Why the hell would you tell him you're making a room for him? I seriously doubt Stephanie or my dad will let him sleep over. It'll just disappoint him. Sarah sighed and plopped down on my bed, looking around my room curiously and noting that despite the fact that I had unpacked everything, the room still looked bare. I told him that because I want him to get used to the idea that there's another house out there for him to call home. "He's always welcome, and so are you," she said at long last. I stared at her for a moment. "I really appreciate that, miss, but..." She interrupted me. "I know you want to get away from here, Brittany. We just need to figure out how you can take Andy with you when you leave. There has to be a way to convince a judge that you should be his legal guardian, not that shitty stepmom or your dad who's never around." "Sarah? Sarah?" I said, feeling moved. "Are you saying that if we find a way?" I couldn't utter the words, my throat closing up. Did she really just say that me and Hay were welcome to live with them? At the Clinton house? I talked about it with Alexander Brittany. It was sort of his idea, actually. The house is big enough, even with Dannis moving in, and you'd hardly cost a thing anyway. It's just the legal aspect. He's looking into it with Dannis as we speak, probably. Suddenly, I was bawling my eyes out, glad that Sarah didn't hesitate to pull me into a tight embrace. "That's so nice of you, all of you," I hiccuped through my tears. Sarah was patting my back as I cried. "It's what best friends and lovers are for, hun," she said. Alexander wanted me and Hay both to live at his house? I couldn't believe it. These people, even though I'd known them for such a short while, had already succeeded in making me feel so much less alone. They'd make me feel welcome and loved, and they didn't hesitate to include Andy into all of this. After a while, I pulled back and still sniffling. I smiled at Sarah. Now, what was this about Dannis moving in? I had never seen Sarah blush before, but she came damn close to it now. She looked away from me and hid her face behind a curtain of hair. "Seriously, miss, I know he's cute and all, but first time he saw him, you went and stuck your tongue down his throat. Shut up!" "It wasn't like that," my friend exclaimed, and then she giggled. "He's just so... God, I'm just so in love, Britt." The moment I laid eyes on him, I just knew. He's the one, and the best part is, he knew it too. I smiled and hugged her again before I'd met Alexander. I wouldn't have believed in love at first sight. But now, a knock on the door and then Stephanie's voice. "Sarah, dear? Shouldn't you be on your way home? Your parents must be expecting you by now." Sarah cast me a look, then yelled back sweetly, "Oh heavens, I didn't know it was this late already. Thank you for the reminder, Mrs. B. Baker." She stood up gracefully from the bed and gave me another hug. "I'll see you tomorrow at school. Don't forget to pack another overnight bag, just in case, and your fancy clothes so I can help you prepare for the date." I promised I wouldn't forget. She was almost out the door when she spun around. "Where did you learn that lullaby?" Her expression was confused. B, I shrugged. Alexander sung it to me a few times. I guess I picked it up from him, didn't realize I knew all the words until I sang it tonight. Sarah nodded. You're lucky, he never sings for me, not even when I have nightmares. I winked. You have Dannis to do that now. Night, Brittany. With that, she was out the door, dancing down the stairs, light as a feather as always. I prepared my bag and then got ready for bed. Before I turned off the light, I grabbed my phone. I had several new messages. 3 from Dannis, telling me to tell Sarah to get home because he missed her. I hadn't expected the guy to be so clingy. 1 was from Alexander, and my heart literally skipped a beat when I read it. You can sing me to sleep tomorrow if you'd like. You are always welcome at my home, both of you. And don't cover up the Hicky agremoqua. How had he known I'd been singing a lullaby? Had Sarah told him already? But as I checked the time on the text messages, I saw that he'd sent it just a few minutes after Andy had fallen asleep. It was eerie. Damn, man really seemed to be able to read minds, even over such a distance. Of course, that was ridiculous. Still, I didn't reply to his message, but furiously thought, "You're going to pay for that hickey, Mr. Clinton." Oh, and the deal is off. If he really could read minds and he had been, then he'd know. I was sure he knew. I had a feeling he was laughing so hard right now that he'd fallen right out of his bed. I could only too vividly imagine Bob barging into his room to check if everything was all right. That image only a little distorted by the strange banging and moaning sound I heard in the background. I shivered and dispelled the image. I was really going insane, but just like last night, right before I drifted off to sleep, thinking pleasant thoughts of Alexander and me together, I felt that touch on my mind, soft and gentle as always. A caress that eased any last worries and pulled me into sleep, guiding me into pleasant dreams.